say what I know about what's going on with the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is in, I don't know which round it's in, but it's just finishing up in Lima, Peru this week, or ended this week, sometime this week. But some of the issues that we've weighed in on, they still have not resolved. One of them is the pharmaceutical issue and intellectual property, which goes beyond that. It's also copyright in terms of textbooks and things like internet policy. That's been a hot button issue, and some of these articles relate to the fact that it has not been resolved, and the U.S. government has not officially offered new versions to things that were rejected by their trading negotiators in previous rounds. Other big issue, tobacco. Again, a year ago, the U.S. government very publicly offered a proposal on tobacco exception, and to this date it has not been offered officially as part of any of the negotiations, so that one is still very much a live issue. The issue of the environment and labor chapters and whether in fact those are binding or they're just kind of advisory in some way, still not decided, very much an open issue. And the other thing that I would just say is that although the scuttlebutt and the public statements have been, we're going to conclude this in October, to people who follow this closely, that's never made any sense, especially with Japan joining at the conclusion of the next round, which is in July. And that just seemed kind of impossible. And there's more and more the U.S. government seems to be acknowledging that is not possible. Now they're saying more, well, maybe by the end of the year. So that's just a quick summary of what I know about what happened in the latest round, which doesn't tell you what actually got accomplished. I don't really know, but those are big issues that we've talked about in the past that haven't been resolved.
I can't imagine anyone's not in favor of us giving preference to Buy American, but with the way the rules and laws and international trade agreements are, we want to try to make sure that it's something of value, yet not in a manner that's going to create a major problem, at least to start, and if we can get it passed, we can look towards trying to expand it in the future.
Mr. Wadley.
Thank you. There's a real great book out there called How to Buy American, if anybody wants to get that book and personally try to buy American. And it does talk about the differences between made in America, assembled in America, or American companies, that the money comes back here, but it's quite a complicated topic, but it's a good book.
We're going to get to my comments later on the transatlantic trade and investment partnership. And I've provided similar comments on the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. But right now, the recent treaties that have been entered into have carved out for the states state procurement and allowed us to not be bound by those treaties. And among the provisions that states have that are allowed to be carved out under some of the current treaties include Buy American provisions, and there are some other states that have those. So it certainly is very relevant to this day, and that is a big issue. And when I wrote those other comments, I put that procurement issue front and center, because that is one that more than any other issue, the federal government has acknowledged that states have a particular interest in their own purchasing activities and being able to decide what it is they buy. But it's anticipated that that will become an even bigger issue with the European trade agreement that they're talking about entering into. And I know that one of the countries that is most interested in having the trade rules not allow for the states to carve themselves out is actually Canada with respect to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So we may have, now that Canada is part of that negotiation, there may be pressures to not follow the practice of these previous agreements and actually to impose the procurement rules that are negotiated as part of that agreement, not only at the federal level, but also on the state level. So that remains to be seen, but it's very much a live issue. Dairy is a huge issue in the Trans-Pacific Partnership because both Canada and especially New Zealand have very large dairy industries, and there's a lot of, my understanding is that, especially for New Zealand, that's almost like a must-have provision, and what that means is that what they're looking at is totally reducing and getting rid of tariffs for dairy coming in from New Zealand into the U.S. And so that could have a very significant impact potentially on our dairy industry, and also if there are price supports, which we've had issues around from a national perspective, but if there's price supports here in Maine and in the rest of New England, for example, that those could come in play as being improper subsidies. I mean, these are some of the issues that people raise around this. I don't know that 813 necessarily, but this does raise issues about potentially discriminating not only against farms, dairies in other states, but also internationally. So that is why I think this bill came up, but I think the price support bill also is one that is of interest. And as the commission thinks about issues we might want to delve into and know more about that have a very direct impact on Maine, this dairy issue may be one of them. So I just bring that up because I know dairy is, even though they're small farms generally, it's quite an important part of Maine agriculture. Yes, Senator Sherman.
Well, being on the Agriculture Committee, we've gone round and round on this, and you mentioned New Zealand, and they really are almost dictate in a sense the cheese prices, because there's they got two islands out there that they're very full of cows, and they're shipping there's a number of issues here, and one of those is that the federal government in some ways sets the price of milk, and you have two big companies that handle about 60 to 70% of the milk, and buy about 60% of the milk in this country. There's a move now, and they've tried, Walt Whitcomb's Commissioner of Agriculture, and he's got a group of states that are really taking a look at how milk is priced in this country. And they've got people interested because Maine is a fair player in this. It's about $600 million impact of the dairy industry, and direct money about $400 million. And Walt and the Northeast are hectoring our senators and representatives in the Farm Bill to take a look at how there's sort of I don't want to call it price fixing, that's a poor way to say it, but the price of milk should be higher by about $1 or $1.50 a hundredweight if you took some of the Fed regulations out of it. But the big piece is the cheese piece with New Zealand right now, and that somehow the Chicago market looks at cheese and says, yep, here's the marginal price that you're going to set. So it is we'll keep a bunch of lawyers busy for the next, with all due respect to the lawyers sitting here, for the next 10 years, I think. But hopefully we can get something in this Farm Bill that makes it a little fairer than what it is now. And it is unfair how the milk is priced. And there is, in Maine, we do have this tier system that kicks in only if the cost of producing the milk goes below a certain fixed price. And that's sort of what we're in right now. That's the little fight in appropriations, as you probably know, one-time deal. If the price of corn goes down so that the feed purchases are not about half again what they were, you will not need that subsidy, because the price of milk to the farmers right now is about $20 a hundredweight, and that is, all things being equal, if the corn wasn't as scarce as the corn is, then none of that subsidy would be needed. And you can't call it a subsidy because you know how that's maneuvered, so to speak.
So that just goes to show how these issues of, funding of these farms in one way or another, and how prices are set is very involved with these treaties which deal with tariffs. And the other issue I hadn't mentioned is that apparently in New Zealand, and again, I don't know much about it because I haven't really dealt, I've had to kind of try to focus on what I can, but some claim that the New Zealand government is very involved in their dairy industry, and so they're saying it's almost like a state-owned enterprise, and that raises all kinds of other issues about it's a way of subsidizing the production by simply having the state being a party to that. And that's a whole separate chapter in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which may or may not happen because it's a sort of a new area to go into. So,
May I add up?
Yep.
Somewhat closer to home. Canada subsidizes their dairy farmers to no end, and if they were competing with Maine, the Canadian dairy farmers would be out of business because they get paid somewhere around $30 to $35 a hundredweight. In Maine, on the market, sort of forces if $18 to $22 a hundredweight. They're completely they're subsidized, and that's what at least the Quebec government does for those. And so that's right across the border. We don't have to go to New Zealand if we get some sort of agreement with our Canadian New Brunswickans and Quebecians, so to speak. But it's we live it.
So and that remains to be seen what happens with dairy, but there's some who say that that's going to be one of those issues at the end of the Trans-Pacific Partnership that either makes or breaks the whole agreement, because it's so important to countries such as Canada, New Zealand, and the U.S. But it's very difficult to figure out how to do it. So, okay, so next one, to
Thank you.
the next on the agenda. I guess it's me. Okay, so we don't have a quorum, so we're not in a position to take a formal vote on this, but I thought I would at least brief you on the Trans-Atlantic Trade and Investment Agreement. And what you have in your packet is something from the Federal Register, which actually asked for comments. And what happened was, after our last meeting, I got some emails from people from around the country, as well as from the IGPAC, which is the Intergovernmental Advisory Commission, which are other state-level folks who are cleared advisors, mentioning that the deadline for filing comments on this was May 10th. And I got that notice I think it was maybe May 9th, I'm not sure. And so, the commission had previously responded to some other Federal Register notices. This is before the government actually enters into negotiations. They're getting comments from anybody and everybody about what they should be thinking about, what are the particular issues, what are particular products. So so you may recall we wrote, for example, we submitted comments on Japan joining the Trans-Pacific Partnership. That was also something that was in the Federal Register. So I decided that it would be a good idea to submit some comments which drew from the past positions and continuing positions of the Trade Commission. And, I had until midnight, pretty much of the day I found out about this, to put something together, and so I did. And many of these comments actually draw from things that I have written previously and sent to the USTR about our position on the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And many of the positions of the commission, when we've taken positions, as you'll see from these comments, we say, we don't like this in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and by the way, don't put it into any other treaty that you're going to, get involved with. So I tried to hew very closely. I did clearly represent that this was only being submitted on my own behalf, but that, in fact, pretty much almost everything in here comes from a specific document of the Trade Commission. I would say the one exception is I did get some help from Professor Stumbard at Georgetown Law School drafting the investment provisions, which you'll see get kind of technical and talk about fair and equitable treatment and expropriation. We have sent some letters on some of those issues in the past, and so that is mentioned there. So I decided that it might make sense to go down to Washington and actually present orally. They're having a hearing next week. You know, I kind of checked in with people like Professor Stumberg and others and just said, do you think it might make a difference to actually show up? There were over 400 plus comments. You can read them all on the website, the Federal Register website, and they're actually quite interesting. I did read some of them that had been filed before mine, although I will say most people also filed at the absolute last minute, just like me. And I was advised that actually that might raise the profile of it. And as it turns out, I am the only person who has registered to testify who is not either representing a corporation or representing a nonprofit group. So, yeah, and I think that since the concerns that Maine has raised are shared by many other states, you know, it might be a good thing. So these are my comments. You know, we can't really vote to endorse them. So I don't know how you want to proceed on that, but I wouldn't mind getting some informal advice because I have 5 minutes and then they have 10 minutes like for questions. So I have 5 minutes, so I guess I would be interested in if there's suggestions of the particular things I might want to focus on in my 5 minutes. Whether it's fracking, whether it's mining, whether it's GMO foods. I mean, the question is not these are all hot button issues, but the question isn't what's the best policy for the state of Maine to have. The question is, if the state of Maine adopts a policy, can that policy be overridden by a treaty and not only overridden by it, but will the decision be made in an arbitration panel involving corporate lawyers as opposed to in the court system where they're looking at the U.S. Constitution and the Maine Constitution and deciding whether or not the state of Maine's statutes meet that. Right. So that is really the issue I would focus on in any of those issues. I know that we might have different positions as individuals on what should be done on any of those issues, but it's really to make sure that whatever Maine decides is respected within this trade process. So given that, you're comfortable with that? Okay. So